Welcome to a lesson on aspect today. Now, in English we have at least 12 tenses. I like to think of it as a 12 tense system, and I like to think of there being 4 past tenses, 4 present tenses, 4 future tenses. In each of the past, present and future, we have 4 different aspects. We have present simple, present continuous, present perfect simple and present perfect continuous. We have past simple, past continuous, oh dearie me, past continuous, past perfect simple and past perfect continuous. And we have future simple, future continuous, future perfect simple and future perfect continuous. However, it doesn't stop there. We also have gerunds and infinitives in all 4 aspects. We also have modal verbs in all 4 aspects. So there are many other parts of English grammar which have the same 4 aspects. So it's absolutely essential that you have some kind of understanding of these 4 different aspects. Now, for the simple aspect, which could be present simple or past simple or future simple, the main idea is that it's for regular repeated actions. They're consecutive actions as well. Consecutive means that they happen in order. So the first thing happens, then the second thing happens, then the third thing happens, then the fourth thing happens. This is your standard way of explaining, for example, telling a story in the past. You will say on Monday this happened, on Tuesday that happened, on Wednesday that happened, and so that would all be in past simple. And that's why we have the following signals for the simple aspect. And if any time you say then, next, afterwards, is probably going to be past simple, the next action, if you're explaining something in past. But if you're explaining something in present, anything which is happening every week is going to be present simple. Anything which is happening usually, often, sometimes, is going to be present simple. So that's the simple aspect. And the same for future simple, by the way, which is will. It's also for regular repeated actions. They don't have to be repeated, by the way, just regular actions which happen. Anything which is a simple, complete action, and it happens, and then the next one happens, and then the next one happens. So this is the most obvious tense. It's used more often than any other tense, and it's certainly for consecutive actions. In a moment, we're going to look at all 4 of these aspects in light of a story. So we're going to concentrate on the past versions of these, which are called narrative tenses. And I hope that will show you that these rules can be followed and used effectively. Okay, for continuous aspect, and it doesn't matter if we're talking about past, future or present, continuous refers to being in the middle of an action. Now I want to make something clear here, because I think a lot of people get confused between continuous and perfect continuous, and it's not surprising because they're both continuous forms. You'll see from them both being called continuous. And the confusion is this: we use past continuous, present continuous, future continuous if you're in the middle of an action. However, we use perfect continuous if you are in the middle of a period of time. And I think this is really important. This is why if we say for or since, it's always going to be one of these, or not necessarily. If it's finished, it could be simple. But very often when we're talking about a long period of time, the most obvious example is I have been learning, present perfect continuous, I have been learning English for 5 years. You're in the middle of learning English, you're still learning it, but you're in the middle of the period of time when you say 4 or 5 years. Okay, so that whether you use this or this depends on whether you're saying 4 or 5 years or whether you're saying that you were in the middle of learning English when something else happened. So this is in the middle of an action, and this is in the middle of a period of time, which is why I've drawn it here. We don't even know if we're finished here. Maybe we're finished with the action, or maybe not. We don't know. The emphasis is on duration with perfect continuous, and not on the action, which is what this one, that is in the middle of an action. I was reading the newspaper when my friend called me. This is in the middle of a duration. I have been learning English for 5 years, or he told me he had been living in San Francisco for 3 years. That would be for 3 years, a duration. So the perfect continuous is always about duration. Past continuous or present continuous, you're in the middle of the action. Okay, perfect simple is for actions which are complete before other actions. Here's the other action here. Now, if we're talking about present perfect simple, this is the present moment. And this is the one you say, I have already done my homework. It's happened before the present moment. Yeah, and you have it now. That's why we use the present perfect simple and not past simple. So it's for things with present results, but which happened actually and were completed in the past, but with present results if it's present perfect simple. But it could be past perfect simple, in which case this isn't the present, but this is the past. And I often say that with past perfect simple or past perfect continuous, they don't really make sense on their own. They don't make sense in a vacuum. They only make sense in relation to other past simple verbs. Because you will be describing a narrative. You'll be saying, on Monday this happened, on Tuesday that happened, on Wednesday that happened, but on Sunday this had happened. So it's when you go back in the narrative, it's when you go back to before these past moments that you use perfect simple. It's when you go to earlier. And by the way, the words before and after, they often cause confusion, I think, to students and teachers alike, because these tell us the timing of an action. And if we already know the timing of an action, very often it doesn't matter then which tense we choose. If we use the word before, we could use past simple or we could use past perfect, because the before makes it clear that it happened earlier. But if we don't use these ones, then you've really got to use the past perfect to show that you're going back in the narrative. And we'll see that in a second. Welcome to today's lesson on past tenses. We're going to look at all 4 past tenses using an exercise. So the exercise is from English File, which is my favourite student book for learning English. So we have a story. It was 3 o'clock, and remember, this is the main narrative of the story. 3 o'clock, and a man was walking down the high street. Now we probably say was walking here and not walked and not had been walking, because it's the first action of the story, and he's in the middle of walking. He hasn't finished walking down the high street yet. And because he's in the middle of walking down the high street, we use past continuous. Remember, past continuous means in the middle of. So a man was walking down a high street in the north of England. Now, wear is another verb which you'll often see in continuous, because usually you're in the middle of wearing something. It's often in present continuous, and it's often in past continuous, and it's even often in future continuous. But he was wearing a dark suit. He hadn't finished wearing a dark suit. He was wearing a dark suit and carrying a suitcase. So a man was walking and a man was wearing, because he was in the middle of walking down the high street and he was in the middle of wearing these clothes. His name was Terry, and he... Now, notice at the end of the sentence we have for the last 20 years. That for is a signal word for perfect tenses. Live can be stative or dynamic, and I actually prefer it as a dynamic verb, but you can use it in a stative way. So you can say had been living or had lived. And please notice that this period of 20 years was before it was 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock is the main anchor for this story. It's the main past simple and past continuous series of events. They happen from 3 o'clock onwards. Anything that happened before 3 o'clock will be in past perfect. So here we have, and he had been living away from home for the last 20 years. And for the last 20 years means it must be past perfect. In fact, now, when was he in prison? Was he in prison after 3 o'clock or before 3 o'clock? Of course, it was before 3 o'clock. It was for the previous 20 years before 3 o'clock. So, in fact, he had been in prison. It can't be continuous because be is a stative verb. So, he had been in prison. Not perfect continuous, perfect simple. Terry was feeling totally depressed. Yeah, he was in the middle of feeling depressed because everything in his hometown had changed. Now, it must be perfect again because everything changed before it was 3 o'clock. Yet again, we're going back before it's 3 o'clock, and so we must use a perfect tense to show the listener or the reader that it's before 3 o'clock. And by the way, you can say Terry felt totally depressed, and it's because feel, like live and work, is stative and dynamic at the same time. So we can say either. We can say Terry was feeling totally depressed or Terry felt totally depressed because everything in his hometown had changed. The park where he used to play was now a car park. The house where he was born... Now, when did this house disappear? Was it before 3 o'clock? Yes, it was. So, the house where he was born had disappeared, and in its place, ironically, was a bank. Terry... Okay, now when did he decide? Is this after 3 o'clock? It is. So here we just use past simple. Terry decided to have a cup of coffee in the old snack bar where he used to go with his friends after school. But it had become a burger bar. And again, we must say had become, because when did it become a burger bar? Before 3 o'clock? Probably, not after 3 o'clock, but it probably happened a few months earlier, or a few years. So, it had become a burger bar. Now we have a nice signal for past continuous. We have while. So we know it's going to be while he was paying for his coffee, while he was in the middle of paying for his coffee. Please remember in the middle of for past continuous, it's very useful. While he was in the middle of paying for his coffee, he found an old ticket in his wallet. Now remember that found is after 3 o'clock. This is why it's past simple. It was for a pair of shoes. Now when did he take them to be repaired? The day before the bank robbery 20 years ago. So it's got to be perfect tense again, past perfect. It was for a pair of shoes he had taken to be repaired the day before the bank robbery 20 years ago. The shoe repairer was an old man then, so Terry was sure that he must be dead. But when he turned, past simple because it's after 3 o'clock, he turned the corner of the street, he couldn't believe his eyes. The shop was still there, and it was the same shoe repairer. He looked about 100 years old. Terry was so happy. Terry told him that he had been living in Australia for the past 20 years. Again, this was before 3 o'clock. And that he had forgotten to pick up some shoes before he left England. He had forgotten it before he left England. So this was a long time ago as well. It was before 3 o'clock, so had forgotten. The shoe repairer disappeared into the back of the shop. After 10 minutes, now after 10 minutes, this is maybe at 3:15 or 3:20. After 10 minutes, he came back. It's after 3 o'clock, so past simple. Were they dark brown Italian shoes, size 42? He asked slowly. Yes, said Terry excitedly. They'll be ready tomorrow afternoon, said the shoe repairer. Okay, I hope all of the tenses, all the aspects were clear in that story. I'm going to do a few more exercises where I talk you through the different tenses. Please watch my videos on tenses if you want to learn more. I will be doing a lot of exercises in future to try to help students who are struggling with tenses. Thanks everybody for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.